Shabbat Shalom. This week's Parsha is P'arshat Ve'era, and I have to admit that every year when we get to P'arshat Ve'era, I have a little trouble getting into the Parsha. I'm a little bit confused because the Parsha actually begins in the middle of a conversation or a theophany or a dialogue, whatever you want to call it, between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Moshe, and it takes a while to sort of recall where the dialogue had left off at the end of Parshat Shmot, and then pick it up at the beginning of Parshat Ve'era. Now, so I've always wondered why Chazal, whoever it was, their names are not known to us, who divided the Torah into Parshiot, why they decided to put the break exactly where they did at the beginning of Parshat Ve'era. Now, from a literary point of view, it's very clear that there's good reason for this, because in Parshat Shmot, the very last pasuk has HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking to Moshe in this way: "Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Ata tira asher aseh leFaro." Whereas the first pasuk in Ve'era, "Vayidaber Elohim el Moshe." So we have here a different verb, dibor rather than amirah, for the way Kadosh Baruch Hu is speaking, and we have here different divine names. The end of Parshat Shmot, Shem Havaya, at the beginning of our Parsha, Elohim. And this has been taken to mean, that basically what happened was that after Moshe complained that ever since he began his mission, things had only gotten worse. So first the Kadosh Baruch Hu, calmed him down gently and said, "Don't worry. In the end, you'll see that we will be redeemed." And then he changed gears, so to speak, and reprimanded Moshe, being a little more stern, speaking more from the seat of justice, the Kisei Adin, and reprimanded him for having spoken this way. How can you tell the Kadosh Baruch Hu that ever since you sent me, things have only gotten worse? And this is what's picked up by Rashi. Rashi, the first Rashi on our parsha, "Vayidaber Elohim Moshe diber ito mishpat al shikshah ledaber v'lomar lama harayot olam hazeh." And other proportion, of course, carry on in this way. But I think there's even there are more reasons, reasons which are even more substantial, not simply the literary form or a change in tone from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Parashat Shmot is a transition between Sefer Breshit and Sefer Shmot. And when I say transition, I'm not just throwing out some tired cliche that people use in Drashot, but I have a specific thing in mind. You see, Sefer Breshit speaks about Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, our forefathers, spiritual forefathers, the people who set the tone and the trajectory of the Jewish people. They're not our genealogical forefathers for most of us, or for almost all of us, because Jews are not a race. Jews are a nation. And Sefer Breshit talks about them, and they are located, for the most part, in Eretz Yisrael, or in places immediately adjacent, such as Eretz Plishtim or Aram, or even Egypt, where, because of extenuating circumstances, Avraham and Yaakov had to spend some time. When we start Sefer Shmot, there's a huge break. Hundreds of years have passed, where it's beginning and taking place in Egypt. In fact, there's nothing more taking place in Eretz Yisrael, except for the trip of the spies and so on. But and there's a need for a transition to make it clear that we are continuing the heritage, the teachings, whatever Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov had established. It's an upgrade. It's a change, but we are. So it is a transition. It is continuity and change, as the saying goes. And Sefer Shmot, which gives us the genealogy and lets us know a little bit, fills us in a bit on the history of the Hebrews, of the Ivrim, who would become later on the Jews in their years in Egypt, and that's what Parshat Shmot does. And then Parshat Ve'era begins the new story of the Jews becoming a nation. And why do I say this? Because in the very beginning of Parshat Ve'era, we have what Chazal have called the Lashonot Geula, the five languages, the five verbs that HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses in this first theophany, in this first speech to Moshe, which we celebrate every Pesach. L'chein amol b'nei Yisrael, ani Hashem v'otzeiti, v'itzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti, v'eveti. And in these languages, v'lakachti etchem li la'am, Kadosh Baruch Hu says He will take us to be a nation for Him. It is the first time the Jewish people are called the nation. In the Sefer Bereshit, I don't think wherever the Avram and his followers are never called Am, because they're not. It's a clan with sort of extended family and people that Avram and Sarah had convinced of the truth of monotheism and had convinced to adopt and to commit themselves to the moral code, what the Torah calls Derech Hashem, that they had established. So there was a tightly knit community, a small community, some with blood relations, some not, all committed to a belief in one God and to living an ethical life. But it was not yet a nation. This happens in Sefer Shemot, when now a larger group of people, but in a very different circumstances, would almost lost everything that Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov had instilled in them because of years of not just slavery, but of assimilation, of adopting some of the corrupt and pagan practices and lifestyle of Egypt, and they were taken out and molded into a nation. So we have here this transformation of the community, its redemption, its saving them from the drowning in the sea of corruption and disgusting lifestyle and false beliefs, which were probably more damaging than the actual physical slavery. And this begins in Pashas Ve'era, in this dialogue in which the Kadosh Baruch Hu says, "V'lakachti etchem li la'am." Now, after Kadosh Baruch Hu has explained this to Moshe, Moshe doesn't complain. It's not like what happened before, where we have this back and forth. Kadosh Baruch Hu sending Moshe on a mission to the leaders of the Jewish people, and then it's not getting through, and Moshe's coming back and complaining. Now, once the Kadosh Baruch Hu had made this point clear, particularly the point that this is a national redemption, Moshe doesn't answer. And after, at the end of this dialogue, Moshe says nothing. He immediately just goes and relays the message to the Jewish people. "Vayedaber Moshe keinu b'nei Yisrael, v'lo shemu Moshe mikol seruach u'me'avodah kasha." So Moshe understood, and Moshe will no longer complain about what's going on. He will in the course of taking the Jewish people with new trials and tribulations and complain about other things. But now it's clear to him what the mission is, and he does it without going back with complaining why things aren't working the way he thought they would work. But the Jewish people, or the Hebrews, do not. And I just leave you with one last chidush of mine. It's clear that the Torah gives two reasons why the Jews were not able to, or were not willing to accept what Moshe told them. One is kotzer ruach, one is avodah kasha. Avodah kasha, clearly the physical exhaustion that the slavery had caused, and they simply didn't have the strength to concentrate on this message and internalize it. But what is kotzer ruach? Were they just out of breath from hard work? No, I think kotzer ruach means that they did not have the ruach. They did not yet have the ruach, the spiritual capacity to understand what this message is. Sometimes you have a people living in oppression who, before you can motivate them to take action and liberate themselves, you have to first convince them that they are being oppressed, because they've gotten so used to whatever status has been forced upon them that they're simply not even aware of the fact that they're being that they're downtrodden and oppressed and being treated in the wrong way. So they didn't have the capacity to really the capacity, the mental, the intellectual, the capacity to really fully understand this message. And this is something that Moshe had to take upon himself, Moshe being Rabbeinu, our great teacher. The process of Yetziat Mitzrayim, and even more, the process in the desert, the 40 years of wandering, of trying to get these people out of the slave mentality and out of the terrible practices, religious and personal and ethical practices that they had absorbed in Egypt. This is something that he had to work on hard for the rest of his life, to try and make this kotze ruach, orich ruach, and liromemet ruach. So we have here really the beginning of the Jewish people, and kol achot kashot. Beginnings are hard, and who knows how much more we have to go before we can really fulfill what we have been destined for, and overcome not only the oppression, but the refusal of some people to recognize that we are being oppressed, that our own, particularly Jewish values, have been repressed in favor of foreign values that really we have no reason to adopt or force upon ourselves. So let us just hope that these all 5 lashonot of Geula, especially the last ones, will come to fulfillment in our own life. Geula shlema, Amen. Sela. Shabbat shalom.